visual judgment of an aeroplane's heading is a simple skill that is often explained incorrectly and practiced very inaccurately. Welcome to Professional Pilot Training Cops Harbour. My name is Robert Loretan. I am the Chief Flying Instructor at PPT. Please study this short chapter on how to judge the visual heading in a side-by-side seated aeroplane. This is one chapter of a series of skill judgment documents we are about to publish. The visual judgment of an aeroplane's heading is a very basic skill, but a very important one. Inaccurate judgment of the aeroplane's heading is the root cause of inaccurate short-term navigation, and it is the major contributor to skill deficiencies that reduce a pilot's ability to consistently and accurately maneuver an aeroplane precisely onto a ground position, such as a runway centerline. I often observe this skill deficiency in very experienced pilots, including airline pilots and flight instructors and flight examiners. Please feel free to contact me if you would like more information. An aeroplane's heading is defined as the horizontal direction of the longitudinal axis. It is the azimuth attitude and a control attitude. It can be measured and expressed in degrees from a datum such as magnetic or true north, or it can be expressed relative to a geographical feature such as a runway, coastline or mountain. When pilots are able to sit on the longitudinal axis, they can just look along the axis to visually judge the heading, as though they are sighting along a gun barrel. However, in side-by-side seating, the pilot's eyes are offset from the longitudinal axis by a half body width. This is a distance of 30 to 40 centimetres. From this offset position, pilots can't look directly along the longitudinal axis to judge the heading line against a geographic feature. However, if they visually judge the heading as a line away from their body that is parallel to the longitudinal axis, the maximum geographic displacement from the pilot's heading line compared to the extension of the longitudinal axis is 40 centimetres. In the scale of distances typically used in piloting an aeroplane, looking along the pilot's heading line parallel to the longitudinal axis makes no geographic difference to the visual judgment of heading when compared to the extension of the longitudinal axis. This is because the two lines optically merge at distances greater than 300 to 400 metres. Consequently, an observer sitting on the longitudinal axis would see the same feature on the heading line as a pilot would observe from the left or right seat. So in side-by-side seating, the heading is visually judged by looking along the line that is parallel to the longitudinal axis. The reason why offset seating does not pose a problem in judging the visual heading is easily explained by optical perspective. Look at these railway lines. Optically, they are merging into the distance, yet we know they stay parallel and do not converge. The optical convergence is a function of perspective. The railway lines in this photograph are about twice the distance apart as the seats in a cockpit, yet a person looking along the left rail would see the same distant feature as a person looking along the right rail, or as a person would looking between the rails. Let us imagine for a moment that the aeroplane's longitudinal axis is in the centre of the rails, the left seat is on the left rail, and the right seat is on the right rail. All three observers in these positions would see the same feature along their respective lines. That is the direction of the line and the heading of the line. The further an observer's eyes are displaced from the longitudinal axis, the greater the distance to the point where the heading lines optically merge onto the same point. Look to the second set of rails to the right of this photograph. You will observe that they converge with the left set of rails but do not optically merge with the left set within the distance included in this photograph. Now look to the left half of the rails straight ahead. This left half more accurately represents the spacing of the cockpit. Since the pilot sits very close to the longitudinal axis, the distance to the merge point from the longitudinal axis to the seat is only 300 to 400 metres. Consequently, pilots in the left or right seat will observe the same feature on the heading line at distance from around 400 metres, extending out to the limit of visibility. In these two photographs, carefully compare what the observer on the left rail is seeing lined up with the rail in the far distance with what the observer on the right rail is seeing lined up in the far distance. Please note, both rails optically point to the same gap in the trees and to the same feature on the horizon. If the visual heading is judged accurately by using the line parallel to the longitudinal axis, then the offset seating is not a factor in judging visual heading over distances greater than 300 to 400 metres. And pilots are typically looking at features many miles away. The heading is a control attitude, also known as the azimuth attitude. So you can see in this diagram that the heading of the aeroplane is judged by looking straight away from the pilot's body parallel to the longitudinal axis. In this case, the heading is along the runway and it is 360 degrees off the compass. This slide illustrates the correct visual judgment of the heading from the left seat. Please note, you do not look across towards the centre of the aeroplane where the longitudinal axis is. Look parallel to the longitudinal axis. This slide illustrates the incorrect way to judge a visual heading. The incorrect way is shown in green, the correct way is shown in red. Unfortunately, some text and instructional explanations leave pilots with the mental set that because the heading is actually along the longitudinal axis, they must also optically judge the heading by looking towards or estimating where the longitudinal axis is. Do you think you could accurately aim a rifle by looking at the front gun sight from 40 centimetres to the left? No, you could not. You can't aim an aeroplane that way and you can't fly accurately that way. If you were to have the impression that you must judge the heading against the aeroplane's physical longitudinal axis and then you look across to the centre of the engine cowl to judge heading, you will be in error by some 20 degrees. This very common mental set is the reason why pilots can't fly accurately enough to land on the runway centre line. A pilot cannot fly accurately if they cannot judge the heading accurately, because heading is used to control the aeroplane's direction. The effects of heading attitude will be explained in more detail in a lesson called The Effects of Attitudes. This photograph displays the correct visual judgment of the heading from the left seat of a PA-28 Warrior 2. Take your time to look very closely. Shortly, we will look at a photograph from the right seat. This photograph shows the aeroplane taxiing down the centre line with the heading straight down the centre line. This photograph was taken from the right seat at the same time as the photograph was taken from the left seat in the previous slide. From the right seat, the heading line intercepts the runway centre line and points to the same feature in the distance as the heading line from the left seat, which is straight down the centre line. The right seat is twice the distance from the left seat compared to the difference between the left seat and the longitudinal axis. In this set of photographs, we can compare the heading from the left seat and the right seat more directly. Please note that the left heading line is along the centre line, as were the eyes of the left pilot, and the heading line from the right seat intercepts the centre line at the touchdown zone markers. The offset seating has very little impact on a pilot's flying if you judge the heading line correctly parallel to the longitudinal axis. Professional pilot training has copyright over this document. At the end of this chapter, we have published conditional approvals for any person or organisation to use and reproduce this document, but please comply with the conditions on our copyright. We are located at Coffs Harbour, New South Wales, on the eastern coast of Australia. Our web address is professionalpilottraining.com.au. Our email address infoyt@ppt.net.au. This document is copyright to Professional Pilot Training Proprietary Limited, referred to as PPT. We provide significant permissions to copy and reproduce this document. So Professional Pilot Training gives conditional approval for all persons or all organisations to copy, use or reproduce this document for both private or commercial use. However, in giving these permissions, PPT has set some conditions. It will be a breach of the Professional Pilot Training Proprietary Limited copyright if any person or organisations alter this document in any way. In using this document, the entire publication must be used or republished, and when using or republishing this document, a statement acknowledging Professional Pilot Training as the copyright holder must be included. The statement must be made in such a way that all persons viewing the published document are made aware of PPT's copyright and authorship. Please enjoy our material, use it to improve your flying skills and flight safety. This document is designed for all aviators, from student pilots through to airline pilots, and for any person with an interest in aviation. There is no prerequisite knowledge or experience required to understand this chapter. This basic definition and judgments will be used in later lessons that explain the skill of how to control the direction of an aeroplane both on the ground and in flight. The underpinning knowledge and skills listed on this table are considered essential experiences and knowledge for a person learning to fly prior to undertaking this lesson. Just read through the list, and if you haven't already had those experiences or gained that knowledge from theoretical activities, it probably means you shouldn't start this lesson. Go back and meet all of those requirements for the underpinning knowledge and skills.